From students. So this is basically the new chapter of geography, which is basically industries. So first you need to know what exactly is an industry. So have you ever wondered that the things that we use every day, they're basically made in some workshops or they're made in some factories. So these everyday products are basically, they basically come from the industries. Since these two places, they form up industries. Now, in industries, there is an economic activity going on, such that the raw materials are basically processed, and the raw materials are changed into some sort of outputs, and these outputs then can be sold out to people in order to earn money. So these industries, remember, they always require capital. So capital is basically the money. They also require the labor. So labor basically means the workers, and it all an industry also requires a raw material. So for example, if somebody wants to set up an industry, he first or she first needs to have a money to buy a place, to buy a raw material, and then to hire some workers who will then help in the processing, such that the outputs can then be produced. Now, remember, class, once the outputs are produced, they're basically sent to markets. So these markets may be present within Pakistan, or they can also be present somewhere outside Pakistan. So these industries, they vary. So there are differences between different industries. So the industries may vary in size. For example, some industries, they can be smaller in size, whereas some the other industries can be larger in size. For example, if you talk about the small workshops that we have, especially in the villages, right? So they are obviously of relatively much smaller size compared to the package. If you talk about the packages industry in Lahore, which occupies a very large area. Then the number of workers. Of course, where there are more outputs, you hire more workers, you need more workers in order to produce more outputs. Then the methods. So, in some industries, the methods that are used can be mostly mainly based on hand activity, and the other might use machinery for things. And then we have number fourth is the quantity of products, right? So it is basically the output. So some might produce large number of output, where the other produce small number of outputs. Okay, class, remember we learned about the agricultural system. So remember, in the agricultural system, we do have the inputs. Inputs can be human inputs or the natural inputs, and then there is a process, and after process we have outputs. Just like that, an industry, so despite the fact that industries are different from one another, they do have a common industrial system. So in that industrial system, there's something common, and that is number one, it always starts with the input. And for input, for any industry, no matter what is the purpose of the industry, it still needs capital, it needs labor, it needs raw materials, it needs tools, and it needs machinery. And then there are some processes involved, and the processes make goods. So the processes may vary from one another, but the common thing is there, and that is that they all of them, they do have some process. And then there's an output. So the output, they are basically the goods, which outputs are basically the goods which are produced. And then once the goods are produced, they are sent to they're basically sent to different markets, where the customers can buy them. Okay, so there are two main kinds of industries. One is the manufacturing industry, and the other one is the service industry. So manufacture, the word manufacture means to make something, to produce something. So that what the industry that produces goods, that is basically called a manufacturing industry. So once those goods are made, they're basically then sold. For example, if we talk about the small scale manufacturing industries, then blacksmiths, cobblers, weavers, potters, they're basically the small scale manufacturing industries workers. So if you talk about the small scale or household manufacturing industry, especially they're mostly located in villages. So they're basically carried in small workshops or usually people's home. Then you have the little money is required for setting up such industries. Then laborers usually learn from their parents. They don't have any formal training. For example, they do not get the training from some training institute or from university. They basically are trained by their parents. Then raw materials are basically obtained locally. Of course, they don't have enough money to get it imported or to buy it from some expensive place. And then small output, as work is done mainly by hand, and then they're sold to village people, town, or and in some cases they're exported as well. For example, there are some footballs which are made in Faisabad or Sialkot, maybe, so they are basically exported for, especially for the FIFA that we have. um, then we have the service industry. So service means that you provide some kind of service, you provide some kind of help, so that provides a service for the people. So for example, the industries which provide tractors to small scale subsistence farmers, because these farmers, they cannot have their own tractors, so they sometimes, when their crops, they need tractor, they will hire a tractor from an industry and then pay for the number of days or number of hours they might be needing that tractor for. Now there are some industries on plantations. Remember, in the chapter of agriculture, we learned about the plantation. We learned about rubber plantation, tea plantation, and then there was another plantation, palm oil plantation, right? So there are some industries which are made on plantations as well. So why do you think there are some industries on the plantation? Well, you know, that might be because the plantations will obviously produce the crops, and those crops are basically raw materials for the industries on the plantation. So it will be much easier, to get the raw materials from the plantation and then directly take them to the industries which are already built on the plantation. So we have the rubber processing factory on the rubber plantation. So from the plantation they get the latex, they get, and then they process that latex back into some rubber. And then there is a tea processing factory on the tea plantation, so they use the tea crop, they use that tea, and then they process it in the factory. So that's it. This is a very easy chapter, class. Please go through the book because it's just few pages.